Good morning! Good morning! Good morning! So happy kasi sabi ng PLDT, 72 hours daw yung pag-aano nila ng kumpuni, yung sira sa internet connection. Pero, so happy kasi nagawa nila na 24 hours lang. Hindi sa ano. Kaya, makakapagbasa na ulit ako. Lately, super busy, kaya hindi ako nakapagbasa. Check natin yung ano ha, connection kung naka-live na ba talaga tayo. Yan, naka-live naman. So, magbabasa ako. At malapit na tayong matapos. Dito na tayo sa renewal. Asan ba? Balance and renewal. Balance and renewal. The self-renewal process must include balanced renewal in all four dimensions of our nature: the physical, the spiritual, the mental, and the social emotional. Although renewal in each dimension is important, it has also become optimally effective as we deal with all four dimensions in a wise and balanced way. To neglect any one area negatively impacts the rest. I have found this to be true in an organization as well as in individual lives. In an organization, the physical dimension is expressed in economic terms. The mental or psychological dimension deals with the recognition, development, and use of talent. The social emotional dimension has to do with human relations, with how people are treated. And the spiritual dimension deals with finding meaning through purpose or contribution and through organizational integrity. When an organization neglects any one of the more of these areas, it negatively impacts the physical organization. The creative energies that could result in tremendous positive synergy are instead used to fight against the organization and become restraining forces to growth and productivity. I have found organizations whose only trust is economic, to make money. They usually don't publicize that purpose. They sometimes even publicize something else. But in their hearts, their only desire is to make money. Whenever I find this, I also find a great deal of negative synergy in the culture, generating such things in interdepartmental rivalries, defensive and protective communication, politicking, and masterminding. We can't effectively thrive without making money, but that's not sufficient reason for organizational existence. Saman, full name, address, tapos perma. Ma'am? Full name, address, tapos perma. Naadiha sa kuan, ma'am. Gi-insert na ako ang ballpen.
Saan pangalan ko nagpadala?
Imo ha, ma'am. Ikaw ang nag-receive.
Pera ka, ma'am?
Kanang gi-checkan, ma'am. Na dito sa pikas, ma'am, ang full name.
Adere?
Ma'am, dito sa una, ma'am. Pinakaunahan, ma'am.
Dire?
Ma'am, dito, ma'am. Dito, dito. Kana, ma'am. Kanang
Dili?
i-checkan. Nara, ma'am.
Dire.
Kanang i-checkan. Ay, ma'am. Address, ma'am. Wala ka nang sulat sa address o sa ano, perma.
Naubos, ma?
Katong gi-checkan, ma'am.
Asa man? Gani?
Katong, kana.
Ay.
Tapos perma. Perma, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Salamat.
We can't live without eating, but we don't live to eat. We can live. We can't. We can't live without eating. But we we don't live to eat. We can't live without eating, but we don't live to eat. At the other end of the spectrum, I've seen organizations that focus almost exclusively on the social emotional dimension. There are, in a sense, some kind of social experiment, and they have no economic criteria to their value system. They have no measure of or gauge of their effectiveness, and as a result, they lose all kinds of efficiencies and eventually their viability in the marketplace. I have found many organizations that develop as many as three of the dimensions. They may have good service criteria, good economic criteria, and good human relations criteria, but they are not really committed to identifying, developing, utilizing, and recognizing the talent of people. And if these psychological forces are missing, the style will be benevolent autocracy, and the resulting culture will reflect different forms of collective resistance, adversarialism, excessive turnover, and other deep chronic cultural problems. Organizations as well as individual effectiveness requires development and renewal of all four dimensions in a wise and balanced way. Any dimension that is neglected will create negative force field resistance that pushes against effectiveness and growth. Organizations and individuals that give recognition to each of these four dimensions and their mission statement provide a powerful framework for balanced renewal. This process of continuous improvement is the hallmark of the total quality movement in a key to Japan's economic ascendancy. Synergy and renewal. Balanced renewal. Balanced renewal is optimatically Balanced renewal is optimally synergetic. The things you do to sharpen the saw in any one dimension have positive impact in other dimensions because they are so highly interrelated. Your physical health affects your mental health. Your spiritual strength affects your social emotional strength. As you improve in one dimension, you increase your ability in other dimensions as well. The seven habits of highly effective people create optimum synergy among these dimensions. Renewal in any dimension increases your ability to live at least one of the seven habits. And although the habits are sequential, improvement in one habit synergetically increases your ability to live the rest. Hello, love. Okay na.
Sige, sige.
Ingat. Bye-bye. The more proactive you are, habit 1, the more effectively you can exercise personal leadership. Habit 2, and management habit 3 in your life. The more effectively you manage your life, habit 3, the more quadrant to renewing activities you can do. Habit 7. The more you seek first to understand, habit 5, the more effective you can go to synergetic win-win solution. Habit 4 and 6. The more you improve in any of the habits that lead to independence, habit 1, 2, and 3, the more effective you will be in interdependent situation. Habit 4, 5, and 6. And renewal habit 7 is the process of renewing all the habits. As you renew your physical dimension, you reinforce your personal vision, the paradigm of your own self awareness and free will, of proactivity, of knowing that you are free to act instead of being acted upon, to choose your own response to any stimulus. This is probably the greatest benefit of physical exercise. Each daily private victory makes a deposit in your personal intrinsic security account. As you renew your spiritual dimension, you reinforce your personal leadership habit too. You increase your ability to live out of your imagination and conscience instead of your only memory. To deeply understand your innermost paradigms and values, to create within yourself a center of correct principles, to define your own unique mission in life, to rescript yourself to live your life in harmony with correct principles, and to draw upon your personal sources of strength. The rich private life you create in a spiritual renewal makes tremendous deposits in your personal security account. As you renew your mental dimension, you reinforce your personal management habit 3. As you plan, you force your mind to recognize leverage quadrant 2 activities, priority goals and activities to maximize the use of your time and energy, and you organize and execute your activities around your priorities. As you become involved in continuing education, you increase your knowledge base and you increase your options. Your economic security does not lie in your job. It lies in your own power to produce, to think, to learn, to create, to adapt. That's true financial independence. It's not having wealth, it's having the power to produce wealth. It's intrinsic. It's not having wealth, it's having the power to produce wealth. The daily private victory, a minimum of 1 hour a day in renewal of the physical, spiritual, and mental dimension, is the key to the development of the 7 habits, and it's completely within your circle of influence. It is a quadrant 2 focus time necessary to integrate these habits into your life, to become principle centered. It's also the foundation for the daily public victory. It's the source of intrinsic security. You need to sharpen the soul in the social emotional dimension. It gives you the personal strength to focus on the circle of influence in interdependent situations, to look at others through the abundance mentality paradigm, to genuinely value their differences, and to be happy for their success. It gives you the foundation to work for genuine understanding and for synergistic win-win solutions, to practice habit 4, 5, and 6 in an interdependent reality. The upward spiral. Renewal is the principle in the process that empowers us to move on an upward spiral of growth and change of continuous improvement. To make meaningful and consistent progress along that spiral, we need to consider one other aspect of renewal as it applies to the unique human endowment that directs this upward movement, our conscience. In the words of Madame Dilsdale, the voice of conscience is so delicate that it is easy to stifle it, but it's but it is also so clear that it is impossible to mistake it. Conscience is the endowment that senses our congruence and disparity with correct principles and leaps up toward them when it's in shape. Just as the education of nerves and sinew is vital to the excellent athlete and education of the mind is vital to the scholar, education of the conscience is vital to the truly proactive, highly effective person. Training and educating the conscience, however, requires even greater concentration, more balanced discipline, more consistently honest living. It requires regular feasting on inspiring literature, thinking noble thoughts, and above all, living in harmony with its still small voice. Just as junk food and lack of exercise can ruin an athletic condition, those things are obscene, crude, or pornographic. Te! Morning! Yes, be.
Back to back.
Back to back to back.
Sila dyan na-change.
Isa-isa ho ni te.
Dili, itapad ng change.
Sapad-sapad lang. Patutan nante.
Sila.
4. Next week pa na tino.
Ha?
Next week pa na siya.
Mahuman?
Yes.
Hindi ko putulin.
Ha?
Hindi ko putulin.
Ted, order ka, kuhan ka te, ganahan ka og shake.
Unsa?
Shake.
Shake?
Ah.
Ano man, nag-shake ka?
O, naapoy ka ng kuhan te, ka ng shake. Nga, kuhan ng dragon fruit.
Walay minggo.
Walay mango te. Dragon fruit lang usa mo i-introduce.
Hindi mo ko ganahan ng dragon fruit.
Uy, pero in fairness te, lami siya te, shake. Lagi. Wala, first time ako katry.
Nakakaon ako, anak, do.
Nakakaon na ka dragon fruit te.
Yay.
Pero wala ka katry sa shake niya, no?
Wala. Pila ka po ng shake.
30. 170 ml.
Ano na siya kadagahan?
Ha?
Sa kadagahan.
170 ml, kanang gamay titing lang. Back to back, isa ka kapite.
Oh, back to back lang. Kanang sa man yung hapon.
Mag-gather pa ko, kay 3 days mo lang ano.
Ha?
3 days na magod siya ang storage, so dapat daghan siya, kay kung isa, tapos sayang. Manawat ko sa imo, te. Ha?
Bye, tutut.
Bye, tutut.
Akong bayan, Zay.
Salamat, tutut.
Magulat lang yung taan niyo. Kano saan na maabot, no?
Oh, dali naman na siya, te.
Okay.
Ay, kuha na ako nga dapat makaabot ko og 10 ka order kay para basin karon nga day, o di pabuhat na ko.
At wala si Puan.
Si?
Busy ni mo dito.
Kinsa?
Nasi Kali.
Si Kali, no? Tawagan din ako sila, no?
O, tawagin.
Ah, sige.
Nakakauna pa dayon.
Gani, gusto pug ko. Just as junk food and lack of exercise can ruin an athlete's condition, those things that are obscene, crude, or pornographic can breed an inner darkness that numbs our higher sensibilities and substitutes the social conscience of will I be found out for the natural or divine conscience of what is right and wrong. In the words of Dag Hammarskjöld, you cannot play with the animal in you without becoming wholly animal. Play with falsehood without forfeiting your right to truth. Play with cruelty without losing your sensitivity of mind. He who wants to keep his garden tidy doesn't receive a plot for weeds. Once we are self aware, we must choose purposes and principles to live by. Otherwise, the vacuum will be filled and we will lose our awareness and become like groveling animals who live primarily for survival and propagation. People who exist on that level aren't living, they are being lived. They are reacting and aware of the unique endowments that lie dormant and undeveloped within. And there is no shortcut in developing them. The law of the harvest governs. We will always reap what we sow, no more, no less. The law of justice is immutable, and the closer we align ourselves with correct principles, the better our judgment will about how the world operates and the more accurate our paradigms, our maps of the territory will be. I believe that as we grow and develop on this upward spiral, we must show diligence in the process of renewal by educating and obeying our conscience. An increasingly educated conscience will propel us along the path of personal freedom, security, wisdom, and power. Moving along, the upward spiral requires
Ayun.
someone
Dala po, sir. Sila, mabayaran sa 600, sir.
30. Nakay ID, ma'am?
Balik. Mabalay, manasi, oy.
Kinahanglan naman gud siya ron, ma'am ba? 600 lang imo, ha?
Number lang na ako sa cellphone. O number sa akong padalaan. Direct man po ni sa iya ha ba? Sa akong hulugan.
Smart pa tayo. Dili jud, ma'am, kaya ako ang kuan dito sa manual na ako kay 594 naman lang. Ang
Ha?
na 594 na lang ang available na ko dito nga pwede na ako nga wala pa siya ID sa karon. So pero kung kani siya sa system manggod sa Paymaya karon, ma'am, is kuan na jud siya. Kinahanglan na jud siya ID pag magpadala. Pero sa first pa lang siya nga ano, process, tapos pagka next na inakuha na siya dire-diretso na. Dili ko maka-process, ma'am.
Kung wala ko'y ID,
Oo.
patong ko nabilin man, oy.
Hindi ko po. Ang pwede rin ako kung gusto ka o kuhan, katulad 500 or 550. Ano.
Ako ipadala.
Kay 594 na malay balance dito, ma'am.
Sige na lang.
Kasi, kanin pakuhan sa kuhan ni ma'am, oh.
500 plus 550, anak. Sige.
Mga 500 bila 30
Hindi,
man.
600.
Dili, 594 naman lang good ang balance dito. Mga 570 siguro, ma'am. 580.
Ang ipadala. Sige.
I-try na ako.
Sige.
Kumakuan siya.
Date, unsa taro
30 manggod ang kuan.
Ang taro mo, August 20. Sa taro, August 28.
27 pa, ma'am.
27.
Mga 560, ma'am. Ay, sulat, ma'am. An increasingly educated conscience will propel us along the path of personal freedom, security, wisdom, and power. Moving along the upward spiral requires us to learn, commit, and to do on an increasingly higher planes. We deceive ourselves if we think that any of one of this is sufficient. To keep progressing, we must learn, commit, and do. Learn, commit, and do. And learn, commit, and do again. Learn, commit, and do again and again. We must learn. To keep progressing, we must learn, commit, and do. Learn, commit, and do. And learn, commit, and do again. This is the spiral. Commit, learn, and do. Commit, learn, and do. The upward spiral. So, application suggestion. Make a list of activities that would help you keep in good physical shape, that would fit your lifestyle, and that you could enjoy over time. Select one of the activities and list it as a goal in your personal rule area for the coming week. At the end of the week, evaluate your performance. If you didn't make your goal, was it because you subordinate it to a genuinely higher value, or did you fail to act with integrity to your values? Make a similar list of renewing activities in your spiritual and mental dimensions. In your social emotional area, list relationships you would like to improve or specific circumstances in which public victory will bring greater effectiveness. Select one item in each area to list as a goal for the week. Implement and evaluate. Commit to write down the specific, sharpen the saw activities in all four dimensions every week to do them and to evaluate your performance and results. Inside out again. The Lord works from the inside out. The world works from the outside in. The world will take people out of the slums. Christ takes the slum out to people, and then they take themselves out of the slums. The world will mold men by changing their environment. Christ changes men who then changes their environment. The world will shape human behavior, but Christ can change human nature. Ezra Taft Benson. I would like to share with you a personal story which I feel contains the essence of this book. In doing so, it is my hope that you will relate to the underlying principles it contains. Some years ago, our family took a sabbatical leave from the university of which where I thought, okay
Oo,
na.
ma'am. Ma'am, kining kuan ma'am no, sender name sa kapangalan sa padalaan.
Imo nga, ma'am.
Sender name?
Ah,
Ako ano sender name?
ah,
Ang sender dito sa
padadan.
wala naman.
Okay lang, ma'am. Iyanan na lang na siya. Palihaw lang man siya.
No,
500.
bali manamang mo 580. Okay ra?
I-try na ko, ma'am, ha, kung sufficient ba siya. Kay 594 naman lang good. Napa mang with charge, ngay bayad. Hello, love? Oo.
600 na.
Tawag nga naman sa pipikom kay kwarta.
Namo sa Buenas Banda.
Okay, magpa-ultrasound to siya kay requirement sa iyang paglarga pero kung gingnan nga dili ka maglarga kay lisod kayo ang COVID.
Bito, kay wala
Pero
mag...
ang iyahamang kong urine nga gipakita ang requirement tamang ko itugo yung TV. Nga oras na sa history bayan yung history.
Mm,
kung nga ikaw ultrasound na lang ikarog kayo para sana. Kuya, yan
Doon
ang
naman ang
serious problem mo is may blood.
gani. Lab, ang kanang kuan, doon naman ang diha ang kuan. Diha na lang mo sa polyclinic.
Asa yung gamay ra tao, polyclinic o Tabaco?
Mas lisod bang gud kung sa hospital ba kay daghan kaayong kuan din ha sa tagong doktor. Daghan na kay mga pasyente diha ba nga sulod gawas, balo na ka sa kanang kuan.
Polyclinic niya.
Polyclinic mura naman gud na siya kanang kuan laba. So na daghan pud nagaanha din ha. Pero murag mas madali mo kaysa sa ano. Pero tan-awon lang nimo ang kuan.
Si madali mo.
Ha?
Si madali mo.
Kung sa lab?
Anong mas madali man?
Mas dali man siya kay by kuan magud na siya, by cubicle magud siya, murag per room, murag butik-butik siya ba? Ang kanang polyclinic. Ma'am, 570 akong i-try, ma'am, ha?
Kuhaan mo na kuhaan na. Sa bayan.
570 plus 30 na ano na ano.
Okay na.
Ay, bida, anong hatag magkukuan? Ay, naman, be. Anong hatag mag 30? Lab, baba sa na ako ni ha. I-process na ako ang padala. Ma'am, double check ta sa account, ma'am, ha? 55775194. Tama?
Ay, ma'am.
Sige, 5-5.
55775194 85552104.
104 na.
Oo. Hey, Doc. Wait lang, Doc, ha? Ha? Pero murag kapat yun nun siya, Doc, no? Magi-agian, magud siya good. Tapos init kay karon. Ha? Durian. Hadlo kay sila, no?
Ay, di ba?
Di siya pwede yung 500, 570.
Sabay, ba't ka rin balik di ba?
Wala, Doc. Salamat. Gyapon. naman. Mhm. Kaning 0907, ma'am, muha ni ma'am? 0907-868-8920.
Dili sa padalaan na.
Padadaan na. Ang imuha, ma'am?
0997-0616.
0997.
0616.
Oo.
Tulo ka 4.
0997-0616-444. Nara, ma'am. 530 ra dyan na kaya, ma'am. Nara, ma'am. Thank you. Okay na, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I would like to share with you a personal story which I feel contains in the essence of this book. In doing so, it is my hope that you will relate to the underlying principles it contains. Some years ago, our family took a sabbatical leave from the university where I taught so that I could write. We lived for a full year in Leh on the north shore of Oahu, Hawaii. Shortly after getting settled, we developed a living and working routine which was not only very productive but extremely pleasant. After an early morning run on the beach, we would send two of our children barefoot in short to school. I went to an isolated building next to the cane fields where I had an office to do my writing. It was very quiet, very beautiful, very serene. No phone, no meetings, no pressing engagement. My office was on the outside edge of the college, and one day, as I was wandering between stack of books in the back of the college library, I came across a book that drew my interest. As I opened it, my eyes fell upon a single paragraph that powerfully influenced the rest of my life. I read the paragraph over and over again. It basically contained, Hello, lab?
Sa kuan sa polyclinic na kuan pangalan
Sa polyclinic lang
polyclinic
na,
na.
polyclinic lab. Katong di ba danda sa ano?
Asa na rin.
Diha naman mo sa Buenas, di ba? So kung sa Buenas mo pa straight na lang mo, tapos, Buenas, Vida Buenas.
Asa na dapit doon.
Doon siya sa
Second
unit,
mark.
unit top o sa GS lagi. GS Gaisano. Napatung-an na siya.
Sa unit po GSS no?
Oo. Dili siya totally napatung-an jud nga kanang kuan between ana siya nga area. Bago ka makaabot sa JS Gaisano, diha ang polyclinic left side. Asa na mo banda lab? Sa ano na? Wala po mo kalakaw?
Sa video.
Ay, BDO ka? BDO Rizal? BDO Rizal?
Mm.
Kung pa BDO Rizal ka, saman?
Nyara ko kay Google.
Salamat! I read the paragraph over and over again. It basically contained the simple idea that there is a gap or a space between stimulus and response, and that the key to both our growth and happiness is how we use that space. I can hardly describe the effect that idea had on my mind. Though I have been nurtured in the philosophy of self-determinism, the way of the idea was praised. A gap between the stimulus and response hit me with fresh, almost unbelievable force. It was almost like knowing it for the first time, like an inward revolution, an idea whose time had come. I reflected on it again and again. It began to have a powerful effect on my paradigm of life. It was as if I had become an observer of my own participation. I began to stand in that gap and to look outside at the stimuli. I reveal in the inward sense of freedom to choose my response, even to become the stimulus or at least to influence it, even to reverse it. Shortly, Thereafter, and partly as a result of this revolutionary idea, Sandra and I began to practice of deep communication. I would pick her up a little before noon on an old red Honda 93 cycle, and we would take our two preschool children with us, one between us and the other on the left knee. As we rode out in the cane fields by my office, we rode slowly along for about an hour just talking. The children looked forward to the ride and hardly even make any noise. We seldom saw another vehicle, and the cycle was so quiet we could easily hear each other. We usually ended up on an isolated beach where we parked the Honda and walked about 200 yards to a secluded spot where we ate a picnic lunch. The sandy beach and a freshwater river coming off the island totally absorbed the interest of the children, so Sandra and I were able to continue our talks uninterrupted. Perhaps it perhaps it doesn't take too much imagination to envision the level of understanding and trust we were able to reach by spending at least 2 hours a day every day for a full year in deep communication. The very first of the year, we talk about all kinds of interesting topics, people, ideas, events, the children, my writing, our family at home, future plans, and so forth. But little by little, our communication deepened and began to talk more and more about our internal worlds, about our upbringing, our scripting, our feelings, and self doubts. As we were deeply immersed in this communication, we also observed them and observed ourselves in them. We began to use that space between stimulus and response in some new and interesting ways, which caused us to think about how we were programmed and how those programs shape how we saw the world. We began an exciting adventure into our interior worlds and found it to be more exciting, more fascinating, more absorbing, more compelling, more filled with discovery and insight than anything we'd ever known in the outside world. It wasn't all sweetness and light. We occasionally hit some raw nerves and have some painful experiences, embarrassing experiences, self revealing experiences, experiences that made us extremely open and vulnerable to each other. And yet we found we have been wanting to go into those things for years. When we did when we did go into the deeper, more tender issues and then came out of them, we felt in some way healed. We were so initially supportive and helpful, so encouraging and empathic to each other, that we nurtured and facilitated these internal discoveries in each other. We gradually evolved two unspoken ground rules. The first was no proving as soon as we unfolded the inner layer of vulnerability. Hello, lab?
Dili ba ni maong perpetual polyclinic?
Muna siya.
Wala man puntahan mo perpetual polyclinic.
Nakita na nimo?
Asa man in between. Wala ako ang gikuhan sa internet.
Kung
In
na,
between sa
in between sa Unitap o sa GSK sa kung naamo sa sa Rizal karon kung nagatubang ka padulong sa
padong dito asa man na left side o right side.
asa ka nagatubang na akuan sa ang mong sakyanan. Padulong ka sa sa
Asa man
Gmall,
na linya ba? Asa man na din na linya? Linya ba na siya diha sa GSK sa ano nga dalan o sa atbang?
nalinya sa GSK sa
Sige.
We gradually evolved to unspoken ground rules. The first was no proving. As soon as we unfolded the inner layers of vulnerability, we were not to question each other, only to empathize. Proving was simply too invasive. It was also too controlling and too logical. We were covering new, difficult terrain that was scary and uncertain, and it stirred up fears and doubts. We wanted to cover more and more of it, but we grow to respect the need to let each other open up in our own time. The second ground rule was that when it hurt too much, when it was painful, we would simply quit for the day. Then we would either begin the next day where we left off or wait until the person who was sharing felt ready to continue. We carried around the loose ends knowing that we wanted to deal with them, But because we had the time and the environment conducive to it, and because we were so excited to observe our own involvement and to grow within our marriage, we simply knew that sooner or later we will deal with all those loose ends and bring them to some kind of closure. The more difficult and eventually the more fruitful part of this kind of communication came when my vulnerability and Sandra's vulnerability touched. Then, because of our subjective involvement, we found that the space between the stimulus and response was no longer there. A few bad feelings surfaced, but our deep desire and our implicit agreement was to prepare ourselves to start where we left off and deal with those feelings until we resolved them. One of those difficult times had to do with a basic tendency in my personality. My father was a very private individual, very controlled and very careful. My mother was and is very public, very open, very spontaneous. I find both sets of tendencies in me, and when I feel insecure, I tend to become private. I like my father. I live inside myself and safely observe. Sandra is more like my mother, social, authentic, and spontaneous. We had gone through many experiences over the years in which I felt her openness was inappropriate, and she felt my constraint was dysfunctional, both socially and to me as an individual, because I would become insensitive to the feelings of others. All of this and much more came out during those deep visits. I came to value Sandra's insight and wisdom in the way she helped me to be more open, giving, sensitive social person. Another of those difficult times had to do with what I perceived to be a hang up Sandra had with which had bothered me for years. She seemed to have an obsession about Fridiger appliances, which I was at an absolute loss to understand. She would not even consider buying another brand of appliance, even when we were just starting out and on a very tight budget. She insisted that we drive the 50 miles to the big city where Frigidaire appliances were sold, simply because no dealer in our small university town carried them at the time. This was a matter of considerable agitation to me. Fortunately, the situation came up only when we purchased an appliance, but when it did come up, it was like a stimulus that triggered off a hot button response. This single issue seemed to be symbolic of all irrational thinking, and it generated a whole range of negative feelings within me. I usually resorted to my dysfunctional private behavior. I suppose I figured that the only way I could deal with it was not to deal with it. Otherwise, I felt I would lose control and say things I shouldn't say. There were times when I did slip and say something negative and I had to go back and apologize. What bothered me the most was not that she liked Frigidaire, but she persisted in making what I considered utterly illogical an indefensible statement to defend Frigidaire which had no basis in fact whatsoever. If she had only agreed that her response was irrational and purely emotional, I think I could have handled it, but her justification were upsetting. It was sometime in early spring when the Frigidaire issue came up. All our prior communication had prepared us. The ground rules had been deeply established, not to prove and to leave it alone if it got to be too painful for either or both. I will never forget the day we talked it through. We didn't end up on the beach that day. We just continued to ride through the grain fields, perhaps because we didn't want to look each other in the eye. There have been so much psychic history and so many bad feelings associated with the issue. It had been submerged for so long. It had never been so critical as to rupture the relationship, but when you're trying to cultivate a beautiful, unified relationship, any divisive issue is important.
Tissue ko, ate. Sila ka, ate?
Katong double?
So, isa lang?
12. Najing, Thank you. There have been so psychic history and so many bad feelings associated with the issue. It had been submerged for so long. It had never been so critical as to rupture the relationship. But when you're trying to cultivate a beautiful, unified relationship, any divisive issue is important. Sandra and I were amazed at what we learned through the interaction. It was truly synergistic. It was as if Sandra were learning, almost for the first time herself, the reason for her so called hang ups. She started to talk about her father, about how he had worked as a high school history teacher and coach for years, and how to help make ends up. He had gone into the appliance business during an economic downturn. He had experienced serious financial difficulties, and the only thing that enabled him to stay in business during that time was the fact that Frigidaire would finance his inventory. Sandra had an unusual, deep, and sweet relationship with her father. When he returned home at the end of the very tiring day, he would lie on the couch and Sandra would rub his feet and sing to him. It was a beautiful time they enjoyed together almost daily for years. He would also open up and talk through his worries and concern about the business, and he shared with Sandra his deep appreciation for Frigidaire financing his inventory so that he could make it through the difficult times. This communication between father and daughter had taken place in a spontaneous way during very natural times, when the most powerful kind of scripting takes place. During those relaxed times, guards are down in all kinds of images, and thoughts are planted deep in the subconscious mind. Perhaps Sandra had forgotten about all of this until the safety of that year of communication when it came up out also in very natural and spontaneous ways. Sandra gained tremendous insight into herself and to the emotional root of her feelings about Frigidaire. I also gained insight in a whole new level of respect. I came to realize that Sandra wasn't talking about appliances. She was talking about her father and about about loyalty to his needs. I remember both of us becoming tearful on that day, not so much because of the insight, but because of the increased sense of reverence we had for each other.
You,
Handsome man.
what the one?
Sir, kabalo na ka atong kuan, sir? Katong asterisk 100 number nga ginagamit dito kay base na nagapangita dito sa
TM?
ano ba? Oh, sa TM.
Naaman ko na text nito sa ako. Di man mo kuhan, di man ka receive.
Ano sige ka receive ang kanang kuan, sir, baka pag base magud na ay mangita og kanang kuan
Yung mga ano dan.
o anli na daan dili siya mo gana.
Hindi. Nawala man tong naabot to primero katong si 20 nawala naman to.
Kani siya i-dial nimo na siya, sir.
Oh, try pa na kung ang bilagulan ni mo 50 2013.
Oo, katong AN20 ana. Kay base na ay nagapangita og anli dito, sir, ba sa Globe.
Sa una katong C20 nila mo kuhan to. Ay, try lang na kung
I-try lang, sir. Daghan man na siya offer diha. Naa na siya para sa Globe, naa po siya para sa TM, ana. Kana siya nga ano. Sa Globe na siya. Wag itawag nimo.
Bigas host man to.
Oo.
Sige ma'am.
Sige, sir. Salamat. We discover that even seemingly trivial things we often have roots in deep emotional experiences. To deal only with the superficial trivia without seeing the deeper, more tender issues is to trample on the sacred ground of another's heart. There were many rich fruits of those months. Our communication became so powerful that we could almost instantly connect with each other's thought. When we left Hawaii, we resolved to continue the practice. We resolved to continue the practice. During the many years since, we have continued to go regularly on our Honda Trail cycle or in the car if the weather's bad, just to talk. We feel the key to staying in love is to talk, particularly about feelings. We try to communicate with each other several times every day, even when I'm traveling. It's like touching into home base, which accesses all the happiness, security, and values it represents. Thomas Wolfe was wrong. You can go home again if your home is a treasured relationship, a precious companionship. Intergeneration, intergenerational living. As Sandra and I discovered that wonderful year in ability to use wisely the gap between stimulus and response, to exercise the four unique endowments of our human nature, empower us from the inside out. We had tried the outside in our approach. We loved each other and we had attempted to work through our differences by controlling our attitudes and our behaviors, by practicing useful techniques of human interaction. But our band aids and aspirin only lasted so long until we worked and communicated on a level of our essential paradigms. The chronic underlying problems were still there. When we began to work from the inside out, we were able to build a relationship of trust and openness and to resolve dysfunctional differences in a deep and lasting way that never could have come by working from the outside in. The delicious fruits, a rich win win relationship, a deep understanding of each other, and a marvelous synergy grow out of the roots we nurtured as we examine our programs, rescripted ourselves and managed our lives so that we could create time for the important quadrant 2 activity of communicating deeply with each other. And there were other fruits. We were able to see on a much deeper level that are just as powerfully as our own lives have been affected by our parents. The lives of our children were being influenced and shaped by us, open in ways we didn't even begin to realize. Understanding the power of scripting in our lives, we felt a renewed desire to do everything we could to make certain that we passed on to future generations by both precept and example was based on correct principles. I have drawn particular attention in this book to those scripts we have been given, which we proactively want to change. But as we examine our scripting carefully, many of us will also begin to see beautiful scripts, positive scripts. Yung lab,
Nakapagbaligya diha nga fishing.
fish shelled.
Hmm.
I-check na ko kay ano ang akong gi-order. Kay nag-order pa man ko kay kuan ba? Kay Emily.
Wala nila. Kala ko diha. Yung palisig yung estado. Fishing. Palis.
Na kay nanay karon lab. Na dito ila nanay. Ang fish shelled.
Sa itong nanay.
Dili, baligya to siya. Wala pag ikuha. Kinahanglan ninyo karon?
Hmm.
O, naa dito ila nanay.
Saan ko baligya?
O, baligya man to siya ba ni Ate Janet? Gipadala kay nag-order. Naman si Ate Janet ba? Gusto ka, mag-inquire ko.
Tawagin ko rito.
Sige, sige, bye-bye.
Nasa man na kayo sila. Dili na nanay mo.
Oo, kay bayan. Pila imong kinahanglan?
Dara ka po. Magi.
Ah, sige, sige, bye-bye. Hello, Nay.
Oh,
Nay na.
Wala ko sa tayo. Wala ko yun na ha.
Ah. Ha.
Nang manaman ang kwan.
Ano sa Nay? Nay, gawas daw, Nay. Putol-putol, Nay. Gawas daw sa balay.
Okay na?
O, ka na.
Kwan. Kanang karong hapon, mga man humot. So, manaman ang kaminto.
Kisa ingon mo, uli na mo karon?
Karong hapon.
Unsang oras? After lunch?
Ha?
After lunch?
Wala yun. Kung bakit na. Kuan. Galikit ang pagkas. Napapakalit. Ako mga taon. Kasi,
Unsa maingon niya?
sinado na.
Ha?
Sinado na nga sa tamo.
Sirado lang sa tago?
Surat naman ang diin.
Ano? Karon sirado ang GM?
Sinado ba na kung sarap na pagdalasin ko matipsira.
Ah. Nay, nanawag ko, Nay, ba kay naa sila burn diha? Ug ang iyahang nanawag ko kay naa si burn diha ug ang iyahang mama. Naa sa tag iyahang mother ba naa sa tagom kay nagpa-check up sa ultrasound. Naa pa ba official diha, Nay? Ah?
Wala ka mahatang.
Kay kung wala pa naman nimo siya mahatag, ikuha na nako na sa iyaha ang isa kay kinahanglan daw karon kay nagpa-ultrasound sa kanang kidney ba? Kinahanglan daw. Mama ni ni Bern.
Ano pa, ultrasound siya?
Oh, ino na ako ha, kay tawagan na ako karon kay para makuha niya.
Ang isa.
Oh, isa ra. Sa iyaha lamang mama.
Siya ni sila magpa-ultrasound?
Iyahang mother na, iyahang mami.
Kaya niya.
Oo.
Siya lang ang kinahanglan.
Oh, isa lang. Tawagan sa nako na ha.
Sige.
Sige.
Ko niya.
Oo. Sige, bye-bye.
Bye.
Kadali lang, ma'am, ha? Musta na siya? Pila na kakapi? Isa-isa?
Hello.
Hello, love. Naa dito, love.
Pila ka to?
Duha ka buhok to naa dito ang sa dagko.
Pila ka to?
Ha?
Pila ka to?
65 bantong gikuan nila ni nanay ni Ate Janet dito.
Sige lang. Napikaw na naman ito, pero murag pili mo tayo siguro karon kaya wala yung doktor. Practice na lang daw.
Sa tagom dok di ay, wala po di mo i-try. Kay sayang inyong lakaw.
Sige lang, sige lang.
Sige. Igna ko ha kay para ma-communicate na ko sila dito. Sige, bye-bye. Mom.
Sino mo?
9, Mom. Thank you. There is transcendent power in a strong intergenerational family, an effective interdependent family of children. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins can be powerful force in helping people have a sense of who they are and where they came from and what they stand for. It's great for children to be able to identify themselves with a tribe, to feel that many people know them and care about them, even though they're spread all over the country. And that can be a tremendous benefit as you nurture your family. If one of your children is having difficulty and doesn't really relate with you at a particular time in his life, maybe he can relate to your brother or sister who can become a surrogate father or mother, a mentor, or a hero for a period of time. Grandparents who show a great interest in their grandchildren are among the most precious people on this earth, with a marvelous positive social mirror they can be. My mother is like that. Even now, in her late 80s, she takes a deep personal interest in every one of her descendants. She writes us love letters. I was reading one the other day on a plane with tears streaming down my cheeks. I could call her up tonight and I know she'll say, Stephen, I want you to know how much I love you and how wonderful I think you are. She constantly reaffirmed me. A strong intergenerational family is potentially one of the most fruitful, rewarding, and satisfying interdependent relationships. And many people feel the importance of that relationship. Look at the fascination we all had with roots some years ago. Each of us has roots in the ability to trace those roots, to identify our ancestors. The highest and the most powerful motivation in doing that is not for ourselves only, but for our posterity, for the posterity of all mankind. As someone once observed, there are only two lasting bequests we can give our children. One is roots, the other wings. Becoming a transition person. Another among things I believe that giving wings to our children and to other means empowering them with the freedom to rise above negative scripting that had been passed down to us. I believe it means becoming what my friend and associate, Dr. Terry Warner, calls a transition person. Instead of transferring those scripts to the next generation, we can change them, and we can do it in a way that will build relationships in the process. If your parents abused you as a child, that does not mean that you have to abuse your own children. Yet there's plenty of evidence to indicate that you will tend to leave out that script. But because you're proactive, you can rewrite the script. You can choose not only not to abuse your children, but to affirm them, to script them in a positive ways. You can write in your personal mission statement into your mind and heart. You can visualize yourself living in harmony with that mission statement in your daily private victory. You can take you can take steps to love and forgive your own parents, and if they are still living, to build a positive relationship with them by seeking to understand. Among other things, I believe that giving wings to our children to other means empowering them with the freedom to rise above negative scripting that had been passed down to us. I believe it means becoming what my friend and associate Dr. Terry Warner calls a transition person. Instead of transferring those scripts to the next generation, we can change them, and we can do it in a way that we build relationships in the process. If your parents abuse you as a child, that does not mean that you have to abuse your own children. Yet, there's plenty of evidence to indicate that you will tend to live out that script. But because you're proactive, you can rewrite the script. You can choose not only to abuse your children, but to affirm them, to script them in a positive ways. You can write it in your personal mission statement and into your mind and heart. You can visualize yourself living in harmony with that mission statement in your daily private victory. You can take steps to love and forgive your own parents, and if they are still living, to build a positive relationship with them by seeking to understand. A tendency that runs through your family for generations can stop with you. You're a transition person, a link between the past and the future, and your own change can affect many, many lives downstream. Our one powerful transition person of the 20th century, Anwar Sadat, left us as part of his legacy a profound understanding of the nature of change. Sadat stood between a past that had created a huge wall of suspicion, fear, hate, and misunderstanding between Arabs and Israelis, in a future in which increased conflicts and isolation seemed inevitable. Efforts at negotiation had been met with objections on every scale, even to formalities and procedural points to an insignificant comma or period in the text of proposed agreements. While others attempted to resolve the tense situation by hacking at the leaves, Sadat grew upon his earlier centering experience in a lonely prison cell and went to work on the root. And in doing so, he changed the course of history for millions of people. He records in his autobiography, "It was then that I drew, almost unconsciously, on the inner strength I had developed in Cell 54 of Cairo's Central Prison, a strength, call it a talent or capacity, for change. I found that I faced a highly complex situation and that I couldn't hope to change it until I had armed myself with the necessary psychological and intellectual capacity. My contemplation of life and human nature in that secluded place had taught me that he who cannot change the very fabric of his thought will never be able to change reality and will never, therefore, make any progress. Change, real change, comes from the inside out. It doesn't come from hacking at the leaves of attitude and behavior with quick fix personality ethic techniques. It comes from striking at the root, the fabric of our thought, the fundamental, essential paradigms which give them a definition to our character and create the lens through which we see the world. In the words of Amil, moral truth can be conceived in thoughts. One can have feelings about it, one can will live to it, but moral truth may have been penetrated and possessed in all these ways, and escape us still. Deeper even that consciousness there is our being itself, our very substance, our nature. Only those truths which have entered into this last region, which have become ourselves, become spontaneous and involuntary as well as voluntary, unconscious as well as conscious, are really our life. That is to say, something more than property, so long as we are able to distinguish any space, whatever between truth, so long as we are able to distinguish any space, whatever between truth and as we remain outside it. The thought, the feeling, the desire, or the consciousness of life may not be quite life. To become divine is then the aim of life. Then only can truth be said to be ours beyond the possibility of loss. It is no longer outside us, nor in a sense even in us, but we are it, and it is we. Achieving unity. oneness with ourselves, with our loved ones, with our friends and working associates is the highest and best and most delicious fruit of the seven habits. Most of us have tasted this fruit of true unity from time to time in the past, as we have also tasted the bitter, lonely fruit of this unity, and we know how precious and fragile unity is. Obviously, building a character of total integrity and living the life of love and service that creates such unity isn't easy. It isn't quick fix, but it's possible. It begins with a desire to center our lives on correct principles, to break out of the paradigms created by other centers and the comfort zones of unworthy habits. Sometimes we make mistakes, we feel awkward, but if we start with a daily private victory, and work from the inside out, the results will surely come. As we plant the seed and patiently weed and nourish it, we begin to feel the excitement of real growth and eventually taste the incomparably delicious fruits of a congruent, effective life. Again, I quote Emerson, that which we persist in doing becomes easier. Not that the nature of the task has changed, but our ability to do has increased. By centering our lives on correct principles and creating a balanced focus between doing and increasing our ability to do, we become empowered in the task of creating effective, useful, and peaceful lives for ourselves and for our posterity. A personal note: as I concluded this book, I would like to share my own personal conviction concerning what I believe to be the source of correct principles. I believe that correct principles are natural laws and that God, the creator and father of us all, is the source of them and also the source of our conscience. I believe that to the degree people live by this inspired conscience, they will grow to fulfill their natures. To the degree that they do not, they will not rise above the animal plane. I believe that there are parts to human nature that cannot be reached by either legislation or education, but require the power of God to deal with. I believe that as a human beings, we cannot perfect ourselves to the degree to which we align ourselves with correct principles, divine endowments. Ha? Ay, sige ma'am. Kasulat na. Asa kinain niyo ha, ma'am?
Kanang ting say kanang say ako pa man diri ko padala unta ko.
Ah,
Padala unta na ko na basig dili makuan. Dili ko ba sa mga
ang unsa may padala?
padala ko kanang nagwalis lang ba aron ako mo are.
Oh, tapos,
Fix lang ko sa inyo ha.
mm, unsa man siya, unsay pras sana? Unsay
Hindi
pras?
ka parang kita na padala lang ako sa lain ba.
Ah,
Padala lang ko sa tangod
oo,
sa lunwalit.
oo. Okay.
Kailangan ko sa adlaw unta mo.
Mm,
Kailangan ko ba taga sige.
di ma-load. Sa puzzle ninyo, ha?
Oh.
Kabalo na ka atong pagkuan at unsa may nakay smart o globe ang imong dala?
Oh.
Naka atong as kuan ginagamit ta nimo ni siya katong sa globe.
Kuan ba kanang dubi naman ako ni ginaloader. Pero wala lagi ko. Wala lagi.
Kani siya, gamitan ni siya sa globe kay para maka kuan ka og kanang direct gani nga load unli sa ilaha kay basi na mangita dito. Mm.
Kanang gul say kanang katong diri katong wala bitong sa TM nga 20 tapos makatawag sa tanang network.
EN20 na diha.
Nana diri.
Kana siya, kana imo dayan.
Wala wala man jud.
Wala jud dito sa kato gining menu.
Oh.
Kato kana siya ang idayal nimo. Tapos piliya ang TM. Ah. Nama kay number sa kuha. Ha?
Okay, dili ko naga-load wallet jud.
Oh, ikuha lang nimo siya. Check o nanabot na ba? Oh, i-check lang nimo. Basta katong hatagan nimo kana lang po imong
Lagi gani.
mo.
Salamat.
Thank you. As I concluded this book, I would like to share my own personal conviction concerning what I believe to be the source of correct principles. I believe that correct principles are natural laws and that God, the creator and father of us all, is the source of them and also the source of our conscience. I believe that to the degree people live by this inspired conscience, they will grow to fulfill their natures. To the degree that they do not, they will not rise above the animal plane. I believe that there are parts to human nature that cannot be reached by either legislation or education, but require the power of God to deal with. I believe that as human beings, we cannot perfect ourselves to the degree to which we align ourselves with correct principles. Divine endowments will be released within our nature, in in, enabling us to fulfill the measure of our creation. In the words of Teilhard de Chardin, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are a spiritual being having a human experience. I personally struggle with much of what I have shared in this book, but the struggle is worthwhile and fulfilling. It gives meaning to my life and enables me to love, to serve, and to try again. Again, T.S. Eliot expresses so beautifully my own personal discovery and conviction. We must not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we began and to know the place for the first time. Yes, we are done. Tapos ko din yung isang libro and hopefully magawa ko yung lahat ng nabasa ko dito. Babalik-balikan ko tong libro na to. Basa-basahin kasi parang sa habit 1 in habit The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, parang nasa na habit 1 pa ako. Tapos ko na yung libro pero hindi ko pa din maayos-ayos yung ibang habits. Kaya, so yung next na babasahin ko sa next na pagla-live ko is yun yung sinasabi ko sa inyo. Ito naman yung libro na gusto kong basahin. So, hopefully, kung natapos ko itong libro na to, ito pagbasa ng 7 Habits of Highly Effective People for 1 month, kasi yun yung yun yung nakaya ko. Hopefully, ito, kapal nito, parang ganito. So, para dapat matapos ko pala to ng ng 2 week. Pero ang liit ng ng pagkasulat. We'll try. So, thank you. Meron ako nakikitang may isa nag-review. Thank you sa pag-visit doon sa live ko. And God bless sa lahat din ng makakapanood pa ng video na to. God bless us all. Ingat. Bye-bye.